Welcome, everybody, for this week's Rising Tide Foundation geopolitical special, where I'm very proud. Cynthia and I are very, very happy that Carl Jha has taken the time this evening for us here on the West Coast and of the world, or the Western Hemisphere, and Carl in the morning, early morning in Indonesia, to showcase not just some of the present geopolitical dynamics shaping the world and our future, but also, as is always going to be the case with Carl Jha, some of the historic context that is shaping the present. And many people here probably know Carl from his incredible work on the Silk and Steel podcast, or his many frequent remarks on RT as a geopolitical analyst. If you haven't heard of Carl Jha, then welcome from out from under the rock you've been under. And today's going to be a great day. So like usual, we'll do a formal... Carl has presented a few slides, a few formal remarks, and then we will open up for a basic Q&A. And I just ask everybody to put your names in the chat box. And like usual, I'll call upon you in queue. And if you don't feel like you want to ask the question with your own voice, just write your question and I will ask it for you, but make it simple and concise. So Carl, it is all yours.
Awesome. So how do I share my screen?
There's a little green icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says share screen, and you click it.
Yeah, I click on it.
Yeah, and then a window pops up.
Okay.
And you find your PowerPoint amongst the choices on that window, and you select. There you go.
Awesome. Can everybody see my screen? So I prepare a slideshow. My slideshow title is U.S. as destabilizing interloper in Asia Pacific. So I'm going to go through a quick, brief historical overview, and I will come to the present because my subheading is called From Cold War to Chip War. Let's go. So U.S. has always been an imperial power as far as when Commodore Perry first sailed into Asia to forcibly open Japan. Let me see here we go. So this is Commodore Perry, and this is a Japanese painting of Commodore Perry and his black ship. While he was visiting Japan, he made a stop by Taiwan, and he actually made a recommendation to the U.S. government that U.S. should annex Taiwan from China because Taiwan sits at a very strategic location. It can serve as a coaling station for U.S. Navy ships. But of course, soon after that, U.S. itself went into a deadly civil war. So his proposal was promptly forgotten. But U.S. would come back. And this time, after the Spanish-American War, U.S. will come back as decidedly an imperial power in East Asia. U.S. will come to the Philippines. This is a political cartoon, as you can see. The U.S. intention is laid out for all to see. And after all, the Philippines are only the stepping stone to China. China has always been the prize. Of course, on the way to Philippines, East Asia, U.S. also annexed Hawaii. This is also the political cartoon from around the same time, I think 1899. And it shows U.S. imperial mission as some sort of civilization mission. As Uncle Sam teaching the poor children of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines. And you actually have that Chinese kid at the door trying to come in. And also, of course, the Native American person. This is racist cartoon from back in the days. But what actually happened in the Philippines is U.S. waged a very deadly genocidal war that caused 250,000 Filipino deaths. And this is a picture of the famous picture of the war where the U.S. Marine posed with the dead bodies of killed Filipinos. And now we move to World War II. After World War II, the U.S. has a post-war plan for East Asia. At the time, the nationalist China was a U.S. ally. So U.S. plan was for China to become a U.S. client state, a junior partner, if you will, in the U.S. Empire project. And their point man is, of course, Chiang Kai-shek. This follows with Operation Beleaguer immediately after war, but with U.S. sending 60,000 U.S. troops to China, out of which 50,000 Marines. Their supposed mission was to evacuate nearly million Japanese soldiers and civilians still on Asian mainland. This is the map. So the U.S. arrived on U.S. Navy ships arrived in the port of Qingdao in the Shandong Peninsula of China. U.S. 7th Fleet actually made Qingdao its headquarters. So a lot of people may not even know this. Qingdao, China was a headquarters of U.S. 7th Fleet immediately after the war. This is a picture of U.S. Marine in Qingdao in 1945. And their supposed goal, like I said, was to evacuate the Japanese. But what actually was happening was, this is the map at end of 1945. The red area, the pink fuchsia area rather, is what the area under Japanese occupation, and the area in shade is where the communist control areas. So what was happening was most of the nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek were in the southwestern China, very far from the occupied China by the Japanese. Whereas the communists, they have control vast swath of countryside, and they were a lot closer to big cities like Beijing or Tianjin. So U.S. Navy ship then sailed into the port of Tianjin to secure these ports, secure the railroads, so the nationalists will rush in and be able to accept Japanese surrender and capture those cities before the communists. So U.S. basically got itself involved in the Chinese Civil War very early on. But as we know, the communists eventually won out after 4 brutal years. In 1949, the Mao declared the establishment of the People's Republic of China in Beijing. And this is the situation in 1949. The Chiang Kai, so after Japanese surrender, Taiwan, which was a Japanese colony for 50 years after China's defeat in the first Sino-Japanese War in 1895, Japan had to return Taiwan to China in 1945. But soon the Civil War broke out on China. Communists won, so the nationalist government fled to Taiwan, and in 1949, 1950, Mao was about poised to send the People's Liberation Army to cross the Taiwan Strait to finish the Chinese Civil War and unify China once for all. Then Korea War broke out. And this Korea War broke out on June 1950. And immediately after, just a few days after Korean War broke out, Truman authorized to send U.S. 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait to prevent Mao's army from crossing to liberate Taiwan. And again, this time U.S. has directly intervened in the Chinese Civil War. And this is why the Taiwan issue was a legacy from the Korean War in 1950. And because from the U.S. perspective, this is the Korean War, Taiwan, Vietnam is all connected. They're trying to stop the spread of communism. This is August when General MacArthur visited Taiwan shortly after Korean War, and U.S. poured money, CIA advisors, etc., to Taiwan to support Chiang Kai-shek's regime. This, in a way, contributed to the Chinese intervention in the Korean War in October that month, because now Mao took 500,000 PLA troops that was poised to cross Taiwan Strait. Now they can't because PRC didn't have a navy back then. They had no answer to the 7th Fleet in 1950. So Mao took all this PLA troops that were about to cross Taiwan to north to send them across the Yalu River into the Korean War in October 1950. And as I mentioned, in the minds of U.S. Pentagon planner, this is all connected. All these anti-colonial wars in East Asia, they saw this was a challenge of communism. This is a picture of the famous Vietnamese victory in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu against the French. So with a lot of the Chinese material support, the Viet Minh, the Vietnamese communists were able to score a decisive victory in Dien Bien Phu and drive French out of North Vietnam. And this is where U.S. came in. So I look up McNamara's memorandum in 1965 when he got U.S. deeper involved in the war. What struck me was how much this rhetoric is similar, almost exactly the same as the present rhetoric employed against China. I'm just going to read some of the highlights. A long-run United States policy to contain communist China. China, like Germany in 1917, like Germany in West and Japan in the East in the late 30s, like USSR in 1947, looms as a major power, threatening to undercut our importance and effectiveness in the world, and more remotely, more menacingly, to organize all of Asia against us. The long-run U.S. policy is based upon an instinctive understanding in our country and that the people and resources of Asia could be effectively mobilized against us by China or by a Chinese coalition. And that potential weight of such coalition could throw us on the defensive and threaten our security. Just contrast that with our present rhetoric. By the way, this is how McNamara got us into the Vietnam War. And in the next page, he said there are three fronts to, and there's actually more. He talked about our ends cannot be achieved and our leadership role cannot be played if some powerful and virulent nation, whether Germany, Japan, Russia, or China, is allowed to organize their parts of the world according to a philosophy contrary to our own. There are three fronts to a long effort to contain China. Japan and Korean front. He also noted, realizing the USSR contains China on the north and northwest. This is after the Sino-Soviet split. So A, Japan-Korea front, B, the India-Pakistan front, C, the Southeast Asia front. And he talked about the decision to make great investment today in man, money, and national honor in South Vietnam makes sense only in conjunction with continuing effort or equivalent effectiveness in the rest of Southeast Asia and other two principal fronts. The Vietnam War, it's all about China. It's all about U.S. attempt to contain China. This is very obvious from McNamara's memorandum. And he says the job, even if we can shift some responsibility to some Asian countries, will continue to require American attention, money, and from time to time, unfortunately, lives. Yes, a lot of lives were lost, mostly Vietnamese. And any decision to continue the program of bombing North Vietnam, any decision to deploy phase 2 forces, he's talking about the ground forces, involving, as they do, substantial loss of American lives. So McNamara knew well before U.S. committed planned ground troops what this will entail, yet they did it anyway. And the result is 2 million bombs were dropped on the country of Laos over the course of 9 years. And that's more bombs than U.S. dropped on Japan and Germany during World War II. And I included a panel about exploitation of Asian bodies. So this is a famous picture from Times Magazine, Christmas in Vietnam special, talking about the U.S. military R&R in East Asia. Well, it's really another euphemism for sex tourism. This is actually in Taiwan, a hot spring in Taiwan. So during Imperial Japan occupation of Taiwan, the Imperial Japanese military turned this area into basically a comfort station for its soldiers. It recruited the local women under false pretense of employment and impressed them, made them into a prostitute to serve the Imperial Japanese soldiers. When Chiang Kai-shek took over Taiwan, he just turned this around and made this hot spring to serve Americans. Because during the Cold War, U.S. had stationed troops in Taiwan after Korean War. At the height of Vietnam War, at one point, U.S. rotated about 60,000 troops on Taiwan. And this, this is this is not just country being bombed. This is, the Asians are being used in demeaning ways in all sort of manners. This is a picture of U.S. military on Taiwan, and U.S. not only deployed troops, U.S. also deployed nuclear missiles and nukes. In fact, in Daniel Ellsberg, a revelation before he passed away was in 1958, U.S. actually had a plan to nuke mainland China if China had made a move to seize a Taiwan-controlled offshore island of Kinmen. And this was a title, The Year America Planned to Nuke China. It was 1958, the second Taiwan Strait crisis. And this was all before China acquired its own nuclear bomb. So US thought it could do it without impunity. And of course, in 1964, China exploded its own first atomic bomb. And that led to 1972, Nixon visit China. This is a picture of Nixon and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai toasting each other. They signed what's called the Shanghai Communique in Shanghai, which people can Google and look it up on US government site. And the most important part is that US acknowledged that all Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait maintain there's but one China and Taiwan is a part of China. US government does not challenge that position. It reaffirms its interest in the peaceful settlement of Taiwan question by the Chinese themselves. Now, this is a cornerstone of Sino-American relationship after 1972. And this forms the basis what's called One China policy by US, which Biden claimed that he upholds, but in reality sabotage in many ways. And this is a scholar actually compiled a list of China threat articles that appear in American mainstream media like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, etc., Washington Post, etc., etc. He stopped in 2006. I mean, by now it will be off the chart. So this will be interesting. It shows the kind of the trajectory of the Sino-American relationship after the end of Cold War. And, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Pentagon has been searching for an enemy to replace, to fill the shoes of USSR, so to speak, in order to justify hundreds of billions of US defense spending. I remember when I came to US in 1990, and I was already reading articles about China threat. But back in 1990, China was still a very desperately poor nation. And I don't think a lot of people buy the China threat. As you can see, the number of articles in 1992 and 1994 are actually quite low. And there was a peak in 1996. That's the third Taiwan crisis, when China conducted missile tests around Taiwan Strait, and Bill Clinton sent the U.S. aircraft carrier group into the Taiwan Strait. And then there's a big peak in 2001. And if people remember, that's when Donald Rumsfeld decided to increase the number of U.S. spy planes buzzing Chinese coast. And that caused the Hainan spy plane incident when a U.S. spy plane crash landed on the Hainan Island. And at that time, the tension was really high. And it just so happened, a few months later, 9/11 happened, U.S. attention get redirected elsewhere. That's why you see this sharp decline in the China threat articles. And from then onwards, U.S. attention has been on the Middle East, waging the illegal war against Iraq, Afghanistan, and later Libya. And now we have, this lasted until about 2009 or 2010, when with the Obama administration, when Hillary Clinton was serving as a Secretary of State, when she come up with the term pivot to Asia. What the pivot to Asia is talking about is not talking about economic pivot. It's talking about military deployment of U.S. military asset away from Middle East, away from the wars of Iraq, which was winding up, to East Asia. And now we have today. This is an article that was published just last week by New York Times, Act of War Inside America's Silicon Blockade Against China. It's actually a very good article. And it talks about the rationale why U.S. is waging an economic war against China right now. I highlighted a couple points. So not only we are not going to allow China to progress any further technology, we're going to actively reverse their current state of art, Allen says. And this is according to top think tankers in United States. And if the control are successful, they could handicap China for a generation. This is talking about the U.S. restriction of advanced semiconductor sale to China. Now, this is not a restriction on U.S. companies. This is a global ban. So any company in the world that has any transaction with the United States, that use any U.S. tools, use any U.S. technology, they're not allowed to sell advanced semiconductor equipment to China. And he's also said, I would told you that that's an act of war. We would have been, if you told me about these rules 5 years ago, I would told you that's an act of war. We have to be at war. So we're actually at war with China right now. Right now, we're in the economic war phase. And now there's a couple of reasons why U.S. is doing this. And primarily it's because AI, the one example is well, the chips are the lifeblood of the modern economy. China currently actually spend more money to import chips than oil. Everything that powers our modern life, it relies on the semiconductor chips. And the OpenAI's ChatGPT reportedly trained on 10,000s of most advanced chips are currently available. Now, why is U.S. this concerned about AI? This man. This is a former Google CEO, Eric Schmidt. And there's a good article from The Wire a couple months ago actually talking about how Eric Schmidt was basically the driver behind the U.S. economic war on China right now. And a lot of this article is very telling. The former Google CEO is on a mission to rewire the U.S. military with cutting-edge artificial intelligence to take on China. A startup called Ishtari, backed by Eric Schmidt. And Schmidt says he can bring a dose of tech industry innovation to U.S. military engineering. It's very exciting. The company reflects Schmidt's unique position as a link between the tech industry and the Pentagon, because Eric Schmidt was he got the job as the chairman of a committee that ties the big tech and the military together. As all we know now, it's not MIC anymore. It's no longer military industrial complex. It's military industrial intelligence. Military intelligence industrial complex, and big tech is very much part of that. So Schmidt was tasked in 2016 by Obama's administration to chair a new defense innovation board, try to modernize the DoD. And something Schmidt said was very telling. He said, imagine you and I decide to solve the Ukrainian problem, and the DoD give us $100 million. It's all about money. And with Schmidt's help, a similar view has taken root inside the DoD over the past decades, where the leader believes that AI will revolutionize military hardware. And it goes on to talk about the AI technology is mostly being invented by the private sector. The best tools that could prove critical to the military, such as algorithms capable of identifying enemy hardware or specific individual in video that can learn superhuman strategy, are built at companies such as Google, Amazon, and Apple. But of course, you guys all know this. All the big techs are in bed with the U.S. intelligence to spy on its citizens, to exert its control all over the world. I mean, they're just spelling it out right now in mainstream media, finally. And Schmidt has come to believe that while tech industry must help the Pentagon, the government must help Silicon Valley. Wow, geez. He became the chair of U.S. National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and their final report released in 2021 focused on AI rivalry between U.S. and China. And Schmidt credited this committee with changing his life by making him more aware of China's threat to the United States. And Schmidt now served on a similar body examining the implication of advancing biotechnology, very ominous. And he founded a new independent think tank called the Special Competitive Study Project. The project is looking at technology beyond just AI and model on an anti-Russia Cold War initiative created by Nelson Rockefeller and led by Henry Kissinger. The CHIP Act, this is a CHIP Act against China, the restricting silicon chips to China. The CHIP Act passed last year with bipartisan support, motivated by concern over China, will provide $280 billion for research and manufacturing of semiconductor devices in the US. And, of course, somebody had to raise a concern of potential conflict of interest because Schmidt still owns about $5 billion of Alphabet stocks. Alphabet is a parent company of Google and is an investor in startup military contractor Rebellion Defense, has ties through different investment firms to other companies that work with the government. Schmidt is involved in several companies developing technology in areas that organizations like SCSP say should receive more government funding. I mean, it's just very obvious right now. This is all a grift. And in order to fund his grift, he is waging an economic war on China. And Eric Schmidt is not the only one. Here's a tweet by Elbridge Colby. Elbridge was a former Pentagon official under Trump administration. And he said, why do I think we're in the most dangerous time in generations? We appear to have convinced China we're trying to suppress them, but we aren't building up our military shield enough to confidently deter them. Deeply disturbing echo of 1941. Now he is making explicit reference to Pearl Harbor. What he was referring to the history when U.S. placed economic embargo on the Empire of Japan, and that some historians argue forced Japan into the war to bomb Pearl Harbor. What Elbridge is of course saying is we got to increase our defense spendings. A lot of these Pentagon military industrial complex grifters are now using inflating China threat to justify more and more U.S. defense spending, which is almost $1 trillion at the moment. And so here we are starting an economic war against China for something that they may possibly do in the future, but really it's just about to making these people rich. And it's very dangerous. It's very irresponsible because China and U.S. are both nuclear powers. Any misstep that could lead to World War III. And right now, people like Eric Schmidt is basically saying, oh yeah, we gotta go down this path because we have to make sure China do not develop the Skynet before we do. I mean, it's a stupid premise and it's a very dangerous implementation. And this concludes my brief talk, and I guess we can open the floor for questioning.
Thank you very much, Carl. That was a very concise and thorough piece. I think that'll stimulate some good discussion. Well, Bruce got in early, so Bruce, I'm gonna just call on you to jump off and start the flow of the discussion.
Thank you, Carl. This provocation, that's what I'm really hearing and seeing from what you presented. What the U.S. did with the CHIPS Act seems, especially as described in that New York Times article, is just such a blatant provocation, as you rightly compare to the embargo against Japan leading up to 41. I'm reminded of a recent report of some mega wealthy person or two or three who are building huge and expensive underground bunkers. I forget who it was. I remember it was in New Zealand was the story. Plus